haven't said one thing about what we can do to help my father. I've heard you talking to my mother. You talk as though my father were dead. Well, he isn't. If there is a thing to be done for him, we would have done it, the old woman growled. We may be able to salvage you. Doubtful, but possible. But for your father, nothing. When you have learned to accept that as a fact, you have learned a real Bene Gesserit lesson. Paul saw how the words shook his mother. He glared at the old woman. How could she say such a thing about his father? What made her so sure? His mind seethed with resentment. The Reverend Mother looked at Jessica. You've been training him in the way. I've seen the signs of it. I'd have done the same thing in your shoes, and devil take the rules. Jessica nodded. Now, I caution you, said the woman, to ignore the regular order of training. His own safety requires the voice. He already has a good start in it, but we both know how much more he needs, and that desperately. She stepped close to Paul, staring down at him. Goodbye, young human. I hope you make it, but if you don't, well, we shall yet succeed. Once more she looked at Jessica. A flicker sign of understanding passed between them. Then the old woman swept from the room, her robes hissing with not another backward glance, the room and its occupants already shut from her thoughts. But Jessica had caught one glimpse of the Reverend Mother's face as she turned away. There had been tears on the seamed cheeks. The tears were more unnerving than any other word or sign that had passed between them this day. And that's the end of chapter 3. You liking it so far, ED? You and Jinxie are the only people who are actually watching. Okay, that was chapter 3. Now we get on to chapter 4. I believe, I haven't really counted, but I believe the first book basically has about 20 chapters in it. We'll see how much we can get done today. Or tonight, I should say. Oh, damn. It's longer than I thought. Yeah. It is a bit. Hey, butt. Hey, butt. You talking about my butt? Nah, I get what you're saying. Just being stupid. I think it's because the whiskey's finally getting to me. Alright. So. Chapter 4. You have read that Muad'Dib had no playmates his own age on Caladan. The dangers were too great. But Muad'Dib did have powerful companion teachers. There was Gurney Halleck, the troubadour warrior. You will sing some of Gurney's songs as you read along in this book. There was Tufor the old Mentat master of assassins, who struck fear even into the heart of the Padishah Emperor. And there was Duncan Idaho, the sword master of the Genas, Dr. Wellington Huey, a name that is black in treachery but bright in knowledge, the Lady Jessica, who guided her son in the Bene Gesserit way, and of course, the Duke Leto, whose qualities as a father have long been overlooked. From A Child's History on Muad'Dib, by the Princess Cerulean. Tufor Hawat slipped into the training room of Castle Caladan, closed the doors softly. He stood there a moment, feeling old and tired, and storm-leathered. They actually, I thought it was storm-weathered, personally. His left leg ached where it had been slashed in service to the old Duke. 3 generations of them now, he thought. He stared across the bright room door apparently I can't read right now. He stared across the big room, bright with the light of the noon sun pouring through the skylights. He saw the boy seated with his back to the door, intent on papers and charts spread across an L table. How many times must I tell that lad never to settle himself with his back to a door? Hawat cleared his throat. Paul remained bent over his studies. A cloud shadow passed over the skylights. Again, Hawat cleared his throat. Paul straightened, spoke without turning. I know, I'm seated with my back to a door. Hawat suppressed a smile and strode across the room. Paul looked up at the grizzled old man who stopped at the corner of the table. Hawat's eyes were two pools of alertness in a dark and deep seamed face. I heard you coming down the hall, Paul said, and I heard you open the door. Those sounds I make could be imitated. I'd know the difference. He might at that, Hawat thought. That witch mother of his, and giving him that deep training, certainly. I wonder what her precious school thinks of that. Maybe that's why they sent that old proctor here to whip our dear Lady Jessica into line. Hawat pulled up a chair across from Paul and sat down facing the door. He did it pointedly, leaned back and studied the room. It struck him as an odd place suddenly, a strange place, with most of its hardware already gone off to Arrakis. A training table remained, and a fencing mirror with its crystal prisms quiescent. The target dummy, and beside it, patched and padded, looking like an ancient foot soldier maimed and battered in the wars. There I stand, Hawat thought. Toofer, what are you thinking? Paul asked. Hawat looked at the boy. I was thinking, we'll all be out of here soon. Likely never to see this place again. Does that make you sad? Sad? Nonsense. Parting with friends is a sadness. Parting with a place is only a place. He glanced at the charts on the table, and Arrakis is just another place. Did my father send you to test me? Hawat scowled. The boy had much observing ways about him. He nodded. You're thinking it had been nicer if he'd come himself. But you must know now he is busy. He'll be along later. I've been studying the storms on Arrakis. The storms? I see. They sound pretty bad. That's too cautious a word, but bad. Those storms build up across 6,000 or 7,000 kilometers of flatlands, feed on anything that can give them a push, Coriolis force, other storms, anything that has an ounce of energy in it. They can blow up to 700 kilometers in an hour, loaded with everything loose that's in their way. Sand, dust, everything. They can eat the flesh off your bones and etch the bones down to slivers. Why don't they have weather control? Arrakis has special problems. Costs are high, and there'd be maintenance and the like. The guild wants a dreadful high price for satellite control, and your father's house isn't one of the big rich ones, lad. You know that. Have you ever seen the Fremen? The lad's mind is darting all over today, Hawat thought. Like as not, I have seen them, said Paul. There is little to tell from the folk of the Graben and Sink. They all wear those great flowing robes, and they stink to heaven in any closed space. It's from those suits they wear. They call them still suits. They reclaim the body's own moisture. Paul swallowed, suddenly aware of the moisture in his mouth, remembering a dream of thirst, that people could want for water so much they had to recycle the body's moisture, just struck him with a feeling of desolation. Water is precious there, he said. Hawat nodded, thinking, perhaps I'm doing it, getting across to him the importance of this planet as an enemy. It's madness to go there without caution in our minds. Paul looked up at the skylight, aware that it had begun to rain. He saw the spreading wetness on the gray melted glass. Water, he said. You'll learn a great concern for water, Hawat said. As the Duke's son, you'll never want for it, but you'll see the pressures of thirst all around you. Paul wet his lips with his tongue, thinking back to the day a week ago with the ordeal and the Reverend Mother. She too had said something about water starvation. You'll learn about the funeral plains, she said, about the wilderness that is empty, the wasteland where nothing lives except the spice and the sandworms. You'll stain your eye pits to reduce the sun glare. Shelter will mean a hollow out of the wind and hidden from view. You'll ride upon your own 2 feet without thopter or ground car or mount. And Paul had been caught more by her tone, sing-song and wavering, than her words. When you live upon Arrakis, she said, Kala, the land is empty. The moons will be your friends, and the sun your enemy. Paul had sensed his mother come up beside him, away from her post guarding the door. She had looked at the Reverend Mother and asked, Do you see no hope, your reverence? Not for the father, the old man said, The old man had waved Jessica into silence, looked down at Paul. "Grave this onto your memory, lad. A world is supported by 4 things." She held up 4 big-knuckled fingers. "The learning of the wise, the justice of the great, the prayers of the righteous, and the valor of the brave. But all of these are as nothing," she closed her fingers into a fist, "without a ruler who knows the art of ruling. Make that your science and your tradition." A week had passed since that day, and the Reverend Mother, that day with the Reverend Mother. Her words were only now beginning to come into full register. Sifting through the training room with Toofer Hawat, Paul felt a sharp pang of fear. He looked across at the Mentat's puzzled frown. "Where were you wool gathering that time?" Hawat asked. "Did you meet the Reverend Mother? The truth-sayer witch from the Imperium?" Hawat's eyes suddenly quickened with interest. "I met her. She..." Paul hesitated, found that he couldn't tell Hawat about the ordeal. The inhibitions went deep. "Yes. What did she do?" Paul took 2 deep breaths. "She said a thing." He closed his eyes, calling up the words, and he spoke with a voice unconsciously that took some of the old woman's tones. "You, Paul Atreides, descendant of kings, son of a duke, you must learn to rule. It's something none of your ancestors learned." Paul opened his eyes and said, "That made me angry. I said my father rules an entire planet, and she said he's losing it. And I said my father was getting a richer planet, and she said he'll lose that one too. I wanted to run and warn my father, but she said he'd already been warned, by you, by Mother, by many people." "True enough," Hawat muttered. "Then why are we going?" Paul demanded. "Because the Emperor ordered it. And because there is hope in spite of what that witch spy said." What else sprouted from this ancient fountain of wisdom? Paul looked down at his right hand, clenched into a fist beneath the table. Slowly, he willed the muscles to relax. "She put some kind of hold on me," he thought. "How?" "She asked me to tell her what it is to rule," Paul said. "And I said that one commands. She said I had some unlearning to do." She hit a mark right there enough, Hawat thought. He nodded for Paul to continue. "She said a ruler must learn to persuade, not to compel. She said he must lay the best coffee hearth to attract the finest men." "How did she figure your father attracted men like Duncan and Gurney?" Hawat asked. Paul shrugged. "And then she said a good ruler has to learn the world's language, that it's different from every world. And I thought she meant that they didn't speak Gallic on Arrakis. But she said that wasn't it at all. She said she meant the language of the rocks and the growing things, the language you don't hear with just your ears. And I said that's what Dr. Yui calls the mystery of life." Hawat chuckles. "And how did that sit with her?" "I think she got mad. She said that the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. So I quoted the first law of the Mentat at her. A process cannot be understood by stopping it. Understanding must come within the flow of the process, must join it, and must flow with it." That seemed to satisfy her. "He seems to be getting over it," Watt thought. "That old witch frightened him. What did she do?" "Toofer," Paul said, "will Arrakis be as bad as she said?" "Nothing could be that bad," Hawat said, forcing a smile. "Take those Fremen, for example. The renegade people of the desert. By first approximate analysis, I can tell you that there are many, many more of them than the Imperium suspects. People live there, lad, a great many people, and," he put a sinewy finger beside his eye, "they hate the Harkonnens with a bloody passion. You must not breathe a word of this, lad. I tell you only as your father's helper." "My father told me of Salsa Secundus," Paul said. "Do you know, Toofer, it sounds an awful lot like Arrakis. Perhaps not quite as bad, but much like it." "We do not really know Salsa Secundus today," Hawat said. "Only that what it was like long ago. Mostly. But of what is known, you are right on the score." "Will the Fremen help us?" "It is a possibility." Hawat stood up. "I leave today for Arrakis. Meanwhile, you take care of yourself. For an old man who's fond of you, eh? Come around here like a good lad, and sit facing the door. It's not that I think you're any danger here in the castle. It's just a habit I want you to get into.